I'm Jason Joyce, publisher of Isthmus. With me tonight is Judy Davidoff, who is president and editor of Isthmus, and of course, Dylan Brogan, our senior reporter who wrote the cover story in our December issue, Murder for Hire on the Dark Web, an alarming story that takes place right here in Dane County. The story also reveals a little bit about the process of investigative journalism, and Judy and Dylan will get into that here in just a minute. Isthmus is a 45-year-old news organization dedicated to providing a rich mix of in-depth reporting and informed coverage of Madison culture that you won't find anywhere else. And that certainly applies to Dylan's most recent story. Since last spring, Isthmus is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And until the end of the year, we are reaching out to our readers to help us continue to do this important work. If you become a member now, your donation will be matched by a grant from the Institute for Nonprofit News and gifts from a group of community leaders. Perhaps more importantly, you will be a part of reviving an information source that helps connect Madison residents to each other and their community. Joining us is easy. Head to isthmus.com/donate, or if you're a check writer, you can email me at jjoyce@isthmus.com and I'll be glad to help you out. We urge you to participate in tonight's interview by typing any questions you have for Judy and Dylan in the Facebook comments. And with that, I'll turn the program over to Judy Davidoff and Dylan Brogan.
Thank you, Jason.
Yes, thanks, Jason.
Yes, send us a donation so I don't have to get another tattoo.
Well, hello, Dylan.
Hi, Judy.
Thanks again for your great cover story. Essentially, you were part of a group of journalists that worked on this project about the dark web and murder for hire sites. And it all started
I had a teeny part of it, really.
Up front, we'll say that originally it was a project of the BBC. They are apparently no longer involved. But let's go back to December of 2020 when a producer from BBC did reach out to you to talk to you about this potential assignment.
Yes, and the assignment, it was during that weird time, you remember well, Judy, when we weren't sure what was going on with Isthmus. We were waiting for the IRS to tell us if we were a nonprofit or not. It was kind of a strange time, and through WORT, somehow a recruiter through them, right, asked if there was any freelancers who would be willing to work on this project. And it was knocking on someone's door with an audio recorder and telling them that there's someone on the dark web that is paying money to try to hire a hitman to have them killed. So this it raised a lot of red flags for some people, but it sounded fun to me. And
fun.
Yes.
And I would like to say right now that the assignment, I didn't really, I knew a little bit about it, but as opposed to your father, who I guess you did run the idea of your going over to talk to this individual who was suspected to be the target of a murder for hire plot. I didn't really know you were doing that, but you did proceed despite your father's fears.
Yeah, and I think he has a good point. Like this is when didn't know a single thing about this individual, just that somebody wanted them dead, right? And I was just going to knock on their house, and my father's prediction that they were either going to have a heart attack, and I would have caused it right there at the doorstep, or I was going to be in harm's way because they were involved in some illicit thing. But neither one of those turned out to be the case whatsoever.
Well, let's take a step back then and talk a little bit about the process that as the producers explained it to you. How did they come up with this name and this person in Sun Prairie?
Yeah, and I really, like I said, just am a small part of this way bigger project, and I want it's going to be released in a couple of years, and I don't really know anything about when it's going to be produced. Sounds amazing to me when it will come out, but it was basically there are these sites on the internet where you can hire an assassin, but most of them are as far as I know, all of them, you know, it's usually a scam to take people's money, right? But the people who are going on the dark web to doing it, they don't know it's a scam. So all I knew was that these producers had access to one of these sites somehow, and that they basically got a name and some information, and that they wanted someone to contact this victim to see what this person wanted to do next. We had no idea what exactly we were in for, or why someone wanted them dead, or whether they would be receptive to this information. It was a lot of unknowns.
Unknowns, right? I mean, this person could have been connected and involved with any number of things that really would have made it a pretty difficult assignment. Not difficult, a dangerous assignment to go.
Well, fortunately, it didn't turn out like that. But yeah, you can see how when someone is taking the step to hire someone, regardless of whether it's a scam or not, to have them killed, you know, it's a sign that they perhaps don't have the purest of motives.
Right. So how much time between when you accepted that assignment and you were walking up the steps to Travis Harper's house?
It took me a few times to find him at his home in Sun Prairie, but probably about 2 or 3 weeks. And it was funny. I definitely one of those, like, your heart is beating kind of thing, where I definitely knocked on his door more than once when he wasn't home, and was extremely grateful that I was like, oh, guess he's not home, and I run off.
What can I do? Not
get the hell out of there.
I did it. I tried.
Yeah, but then when I finally did, you know, it was an interesting reaction, because he definitely I also just noticed that there seemed to be, you know, at the house in Sun Prairie, there seemed to be something a little bit off about it, right? All, like, middle of the day, all the curtains were drawn, and it didn't ever seem like anyone was home, even though there were always kind of lights on. And it just seemed like someone was maybe a little bit paranoid about didn't want people to know what was going on inside. So when I finally did find Travis, like, during the day at his home, you know, he was perfectly polite, but very standoffish, and kind of was like, who the heck are you? What are you doing here? And I had rehearsed this whole
blurt out what you needed to.
Well, how do you even explain all this in 10 seconds? And the whole interaction was about 30 seconds long, and he basically told me to, like, all right, whatever, and get out of there. He was very concerned. I had, like, an audio recorder in my pocket. He didn't know if it was a weapon or anything, and so he was very suspicious of me. But after my initial, like, knocking on them, I think that someone from that was working on this project, one of the journalists, called them he has a British accent, right? So I think that kind of sealed the deal for Travis that this is worth at least learning more about.
How did they have the number?
I don't really know. I think that might have been provided by the person who put the hit on him.
Oh,
yes,
makes sense. Yeah.
But they really wanted somebody to knock on the door and get his initial reaction, not just to call him. So.
Right, because that would be for the podcast. They actually wanted the audio.
So maybe perhaps it's all for the project, I guess. Like, my ability to call him first, but that's okay. It all worked out. And then when I went back to his house to set up a Zoom. Set up a Zoom with these producers who were going to explain the situation and ask them what Travis wanted to do about it. You know, he was very welcoming and kind of gave me a little bit of grief, called me a hipster or something, and thought, well, maybe you were the assassin. I didn't really know what was going on, but it turns out, is an extremely nice and wonderful person who clearly was in a very difficult circumstances, and you could tell it had worn on him.
Yeah. So really, toward the end of that Zoom conversation, he
already knew
identified who he thought. Yeah. So
and at that point, we didn't know for sure, but after the whole situation was explained to him, and the Sun Prairie police stopped by, and they got contact information and kind of got debriefed on the information too. yeah, there were some very tense few weeks after that, and the FBI was contacted the next day by Travis's new significant other, right? And so, and the FBI called me too that day, the next morning, and they seemed to take this extremely seriously from the very, very beginning.
Right.
But there was a lot of, I think it wasn't really knocking on his door that was scary. It was those next few weeks between the FBI trying to use the information that was provided to them to connect Kelly to this crime. And maybe we didn't know if she was involved or not. But there were, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks in between there. And, you know, Travis.
That's true. Just because he suspected it was Kelly doesn't mean.
Yes. And remember, there are, you know, children involved in all this, and we really want to make sure they've already been through a lot. We don't want to give too many details about them, but that, you know, it was like any couple that co-parents, right? Where there's, you have to hand off the kids and arrange all that. Well, you can obviously see that would be very tense during those couple of weeks in between finding out and the FBI eventually arresting Kelly.
Right. So Sun Prairie Police, they were pretty much out of it as soon as it was handed over to the FBI.
They definitely assisted in what the FBI wanted them to do, but initially they pulled Travis aside and said, "I think this guy may be scamming you." And yes, me. You can maybe understand why this is a bit of a ridiculous story to hear at just out of randomly.
Didn't they just Google Dylan Brogan and weren't they reassured immediately?
Well, I don't know. I don't want to.
Yeah.
I think the Sun Prairie Police Department could have acted a little bit better, but who knows?
Bizarre situation for sure. Yeah.
But the Sun Prairie Police knew Travis Harper quite well because of this whole backstory. And
True.
so I think it's important to remember that probably played a big part of it too.
Right. Right. So that, as you discover when you move more into this story, is that the real backdrop for what's happening was this long, 3-4 years, very ugly custody battle that was going on between Travis and Kelly. And I think we should probably mention here too that you tried to talk to Kelly several times through her lawyer, correct? And
yeah, and I've written her letters then since she's been incarcerated, and I still think that might be something that happens. I'm not really sure. I think that's I wish she would have responded and all that. There's also just a lot that we know because she had a whole federal court trial, right? And a lot came out during that point. But thankfully there was a lengthy record of documenting pretty much everything that Travis is telling me.
Right. And there you're referring really to sort of the custody issues.
Yes, which is intense. And as journalists too, it's fun. I think it was Bill Leaders who just like stay away from these custody battles. But because they get ugly, and you understand why.
There's no way.
You know, and that doesn't, I think for 99% of the time, you know, parents have plenty of grievances against the other party that in the long run, you know, you just have to put aside for the sake of the children, right? And that's usually what happens. But in this instance, I mean, Kelly was making accusation after accusation that he was abusive to the children, and also just was this monster. And she was going around town telling anyone who would listen to her. And she had she was clearly a very charismatic and affable person and capable. And Travis says all these things too, that, you know, she is talented in a lot of many ways. And I mean, that's part of that, why a lot of this doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, but clearly something was going on with her where she just wanted these kids, she wanted Travis to suffer
out of the life. Yeah.
And from the very beginning, Travis was like, you know, people get divorced, they share custody of their kids, they make it work. You know, both of them they got divorced, they have new significant others. You'd think that they would have moved on, but that's just never what happened. She seemed dead set to take those kids away from Travis. And after years and years of making these accusations and all these CPS and safe harbor interviews and everything, basically there was a family court judge that said, you got to stop. Like, how many accusations can you make that are found unsubstantiated? We can't. This is damaging to not only Travis' relationship, but you're putting your kids through this awful, awful mess. And she continued to do that, but the avenues in terms of retribution through the courts seem to have ended, and that's kind of around the same period that she went on the dark web and tried to hire assassin not once but twice. And if these journalists hadn't gotten involved, who knows what would have happened.
Right. Well, you want to talk a little bit about kind of the journalistic process behind this. So you got this, you got the information, you talked to Travis. How did you go about, well, first of all, even talking to these sources? This is a really sensitive issue. As you mentioned, there are children involved, there are legal issues involved, custody. What was the process for moving from, this assignment for the podcast series, but then, you have before you, I'm going to write a cover story. Where do you start?
Yeah, and that was something I worked out with the people that initially hired me, right? That I was going to follow this, but that there was this, it had already made a lot of local news, right?
Right.
So I wanted to sort of tell my side of it. So I was upfront about that from the beginning. I think you don't want to take anything for granted, right? Like, just when you have this quite literally he said, she said sort of situation, I didn't want, even though I instantly, and I think naturally, felt bad and felt Travis was being very sincere and open about talking to me. But I wanted to, verify that I didn't know this person. Maybe these accusations against him were true.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a very long court record of this. Some of it was sealed, some of it wasn't, but Travis was very cooperative in providing me some of this documentation. And when you go—
Was he open to your doing a story from the beginning?
Yeah, I think he was hesitant, but I think honestly, I think he was grateful that somebody had told him about this, and because he still thinks that Kelly's out to get him, and it was going to do something rash, and maybe worse. Like, it's one thing, I think he's really worried about what the long-term damage it was doing to his kids,
right?
Regardless, right? And what's going to happen to them, and that she's just this type of person who was relentless in her, like, if she got something on her mind, she went full bore and didn't stop until she got it done. And everything in her life, I mean, that's very admirable in some ways. And he described that about how, how she wanted to graduate college in 3 years, and she wanted to own her own home before she was graduated college. And she did those things. So she clearly was talented and, had a lot of positive attributes. But that same thing ended up, when directed towards Travis, you could see how frightening that would be. And, I mean, you want to say maybe he's being paranoid, but look at what actually happened.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to think he was being paranoid.
Right. Well, it looks like we have one question up here. I can pop over. Reporters are leery of reporting about the dark web because of what it means to connect your computer or internet account to these kinds of places. Any concern on your part going in that this was messing with an element that's normally to be avoided?
Well, I did go, there's a browser called Tor, and you can look up these dark websites, but I figured, if I didn't actually hire an assassin, I was going to be okay. So one thing I know about these dark websites, just from my own research, is that they pop up and then they go away, and they pop up and then they go away. That, I guess that wasn't really too concerned about that. I guess if I tried to buy something, I'd be a little bit more concerned. But people think they're using the internet anonymously, and in one way they are, but there are a lot of ways in actuality where that's not really true. Like, if you downloaded Tor and they take your computer, they know that. It's very easy to take. If you take a screenshot of something, that can be saved and They can find that later. Like there, it is
I mean,
anonymous.
pretty much you can't be on it and not leave a trace, right?
No, I think it is. I think you can. You can surf anonymously on the web. I just think that if you're ever suspected, it gets a little bit trickier.
Hard.
Yeah, because then, like, okay, how do you get the Bitcoin, right? There's
Well, we
always
should probably, that's one thing we didn't really go into, how these, you talked about these sites really being scam, money's exchanged.
Well, they're
but-
taking advantage of what are you going to do when you hire an assassin and you pay them and they don't show up? You can't call the police. In fact, you have just committed a federal crime.
Right.
So they operate on that principle. Now, a lot of people, and I don't really have any, evidence of this, but just in other reportings I know about, even that have happened here in Wisconsin, the FBI does a lot of stings on the dark web. There's some pretty famous cases of, someone in Michigan who bought a Sidewinder missile from one FBI agent and then sold it to another FBI agent, and then they're the ones who get in trouble. So, I think it's important to remember that there is something psychological about you spending money on a plan to kill someone, and okay, so it fails, but you've already invested in that, and what are you going to do next? And I think that's at least in terms of this bigger series, that's I think really a lot of what it's going to be explored, but there's a teeny bit outside of the cover story that I love.
Yeah, because are there really instances out there of successful hits from dark web sites?
Well, I don't want to get into it too much. There is ones where people have tried to hire hitmen and then they kill the other person themselves. So, but I think it's safe to say that the dark web is probably not going to be successful if you're really trying to hire someone. But they're like violence sites though on the internet, on the dark web, are this huge, vast topic that I just grazed the surface of.
Right.
But drugs, weapons, that does seem to be, the dark web is a place where you can buy those things. And there are definitely real sources where you can do that, especially drugs.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of this story, I mean, we've talked a little bit about this, and we've gotten actually a few letters in response to your story about, other cases, other custody cases. We mentioned how hard it is to do stories about that, but certainly this case seems to be an instance where, there were these abuse allegations over and over again, put sort of everyone through hell. And there really seemed to be no basis for them. And yet the system, isn't set up well to navigate that. And so, it's very hard.
I think that was the hardest thing about reporting on this story. It was you can see why someone who, a teacher, right? And you have a mother who comes and says, I'm involved, my ex-husband is just terrible. And you can see why why they need to take that seriously, right? They can't investigate all this, but it was in such a degree, right, of accusation after accusation that even finally, it took years, like this long pattern of false like allegations really caught up with Kelly, and that just wasn't working anymore. If anything, it was going to jeopardize her custody with the kids because it was damaging. And I think it's a little hard to compare this to other situations because this was like the kids were right in the middle of all this. And I think most people, however they feel about their ex, would never do this to their children like this, put them in the middle of it. But that's just what kept happening over and over and over again. And it does seem like, and Travis definitely said this to me more than once, he was treated as guilty and guilty before being innocent. And that's that bothered him, right? And he thought it was the opposite. And it does seem like there was a turning point, like just mentally in his head, when he's like, no, I got to assume that people are going to think I'm guilty and work backwards. And that kind of seemed where things did get a little bit easier for him. But the lengths he went to prove his innocence were extreme, like putting up cameras all over his house. So if anyone,
That was an interesting, yeah. So just so that he could have proof that nothing was.
yeah, and how awful is that? Like that. That's that he shouldn't have to do that, right? And you just saw these, reports where the kids clearly like being at both their parents' houses.
Right.
Why couldn't they have just made this work? It's hard to understand why. But I do think that you can see she clearly manipulated authorities in to her advantage.
Yeah.
To make this guy go through hell.
Yeah.
Right. And he lost time with their kids. His reputation was sullied. You can see
there was the one arrest.
He was arrested and never charged.
Released.
For something that turned out to be literally nothing. I mean, I know one time the judge in the family court situation, was reading back on something about how a sunburn, like a slight sunburn, was viewed as abuse. And he was like, my parents would have been thrown away forever if this is like what your definition of abuse is. And Kelly even started turning on court officials, right? Like saying the guardian ad litems or whatever were working against her. And it definitely seems like that she had friends in the Sun Prairie Police Department and everything that were more than willing to go along with this. And but those are the kind of things that are difficult to prove. Right.
And that actually for this, not having Kelly's input, a lot of stuff we just have to guess. I mean, what really, she was with another partner. She had another baby. She had her, custody of the children she had with Travis. I mean, it's not clear at all what drove her.
It's hatred for him. That's the only, I don't know what else, but she did make a statement in court or during her plea hearing. And this was in the paper and everything that, she did all these things. She admitted to it. She eventually took a plea deal, but this is where her divine right as a mother to protect her kids. And think about it. She's been sitting in jail for 4 months and she's saying this. Now, she seemed to change her tune a little bit in the sentencing hearing, but she was sticking with this story for a long time.
Yeah.
So it's hard not to think that there's not some sort of mental health component to it.
Yeah, no, and I was struck by at the sentencing, though, how different it seemed, where she actually acknowledged.
And you can have and Travis sort of doesn't believe it was sincere, and I think you can appreciate why
where he's coming from.
Yeah. But it's also very sad, and I think it is nice that and positive that Travis and his family have gotten out of Sun Prairie and things are a lot better for his children in a new school where they can kind of leave all this behind. And I think that's one positive that I was very happy to hear that. So what do you think? You got to pick up and move?
Yeah.
Order, that's not how it's supposed to go.
Some people do, but yeah. I mean, and maybe in some ways a clean break just feels.
But there were people that didn't even believe him after, it was all over the news that Kelly had been arrested for doing this.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. I was going to ask you how different it was reporting and writing on this story from other stories you've done.
It was much harder.
Much harder.
Yes, for a couple of different reasons, right? I'm a small little cog in this way bigger worldwide project, right? I think that was part of it. And also that it was frightening you don't know what somebody's capable of. And particularly when there was a couple of weeks there when, for all she knew, she thought an assassin was on the way to kill Travis. And we all just sort of waited there. And I don't know, that must have been it was difficult for me. I can't even imagine what him and his family went through.
And so this was out there. I mean, the FBI there was no special protection for.
I think they did. I think the Dane County Sheriff's, I think they definitely did provide some protection for him.
Okay.
But it wasn't 24/7, you know. He talked to me. I remember just specifically about, you know, him shoveling snow one night, and go out and shovel a little snow, and then a car would drive by and he'd go into his garage, and then he'd go out and do a little bit more because he didn't know.
Right.
And, I'm glad that's over. But I can't say he didn't have a lot of good reasons for feeling like that.
Yeah. I mean, you must have felt some of that anxiety over those few weeks too. I mean,
I was never really worried about my safety, but I was
No?
worried about Travis's safety. But yeah, I don't know. I guess when someone's hiring, you know, hitmen on the
Mhm.
internet, you don't know how much trouble you're in.
yeah. Anything you learned in researching this that in terms of applying to other stories, just researching, sourcing?
There were, yeah, I think always nice to have a lot of documents in front of you.
Mhm.
I came into the story 5 years in, right? And there was a lot of documentation. And I think that Travis and his significant other were maybe the last year and a half had really done a good job at realizing that they had to just document absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And once they start doing that, it not only was great just in terms of being able to independently verify everything, but you could tell it made a difference in court.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you couldn't have done the kind of story you did without having access to that, because you're not going to get those records from the court. It's
That was
all
one
gonna
thing
be
that, you know,
protected.
Travis wanted all that sealed to protect his kids, and he got it. And some of it I got before that, some of it I didn't. And
Mhm.
but in general, I mean, I just have to say, like, Travis was very open about things, and that's always
Which-
helpful when you're trying to verify somebody's account. Like,
But not even just verify the count, actually write a
Oh, yeah.
rich, thoughtful story, right? So that you
Yes.
can describe what kind of person he is and the things he went through. And, you can't make that stuff up. And that is
And
the
one thing that was
detail.
very apparent too is just that he clearly cared very, very deeply for the welfare of his kids and wasn't going to do anything to harm his kids. Which is why it made, this whole, I don't know, people have bad breakups, but this is like the worst one ever. Like, it doesn't even make sense why somebody was so driven to make this guy's life hell. That's the one part of it I still don't understand. I don't think there is a good answer.
No, and there are unfortunately lots of breakups that involve kids and, don't go to the extent of the dark web, but there's still allegations and there's still hostility in kids' lives. And, you were talking about the instances where it seemed like Kelly was coaching the kids to come up with something bad about their dad on video.
Where it's so obvious that's what she's doing. Like, you can hear her on the background and the kid looking up at her and like trying to
kind of saying what? Right.
Yeah, and it's hard. There's no defense against that. I mean, yeah, you have to feel for the kids. And if there's one critique of the family court system was it didn't protect them. Forget about Travis.
Right.
Like, and I don't know what could have been done differently, but I think maybe you get on the third or fourth false accusation, you start. There needs to be something, but you can also see how the school knows a little bit. The Child Protective Services know a little bit. Sun Prairie, like none of them all had 100% of the information, and so like that definitely didn't help either.
Well, there are also no easy answers to it. I mean, what do you want a court administrator to, what choices do they have if, parents are behaving badly,
And that's what was going on.
You have to figure it out, and that's not always easy. So, all right, let's see. Well, I think we've kind of want to talk a little bit about how you first got interested in doing stories like this, or even journalism itself. You are a
Yeah,
dedicated
sure.
journalist.
I guess I am. We really made a choice last year to do this, didn't we?
We did.
Um,
We did.
I think,
And by that, he's referring to when we nearly shut down in COVID.
but never didn't stop working for some reason. We just
Right.
kept going. You, Linda, and Bob and Kat, we just did it. We just kept going.
Yep.
You know, I'm starting to think more and more. It's not just journalism and the whole. I think it really is about Isthmus in my mind. Maybe it's because I'm from Madison and have such a fond memories, right, of picking it up every Thursday, and it was a big part of, especially when I went to school for 2 years and I moved back, when I was an adult, and then I think I started just to consume news more, and I just realized how important a role Isthmus has, and it's also just such a great place to do this kind of storytelling that you don't really get in other places, and it's not so much talking about the deficits of others, but just Isthmus has a very unique place in the media landscape here, and that's what's really important. And I'm really happy now that we are a nonprofit that it seems like everything that we really loved about the place and is like perfectly lined up with the business model now, right? It's been very tough for all newspapers, but this nonprofit route seems to really align our values to, just how we pay the bills, and I appreciate it.
I agree. All right. Well, thanks, Dylan.
All right, no
Thanks,
problem. Is
everyone,
Jason jumping
for
back on?
listening in. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Let's see.
But I hope everyone
There he
takes a moment and picks up a print copy and reads it. I think it's one of those stories that's almost better if you read it in the paper, and there's a ton of great stuff in there too.
It is a good story to read in the paper.
Yes, thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks to Judy and Dylan for telling this story. And yes, definitely pick up Isthmus. It's available all over town. We're heavy in grocery stores and coffee shops. But feel free to email any of the three of us if you have questions about where to find the paper, and we'll take some. You can be vague about your neighborhood, but we'll tell you where in your neighborhood you can find a paper. And don't forget, you can help support this work that Judy and Dylan are doing by going to isthmus.com/donate and joining us as a member, which is an easy process. And you can donate in just about any way you can imagine. And if you're a check writer, if you'd rather not give on the web and you'd prefer to write a check, just please contact me at jjoyce@isthmus.com, and I'd be glad to walk you through that process as well. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great night. Take care.
Dylan. Thanks, Jason.